What's good, YouTube? It's your boy, Blue Blood Sports TV, back at y'all with another one. So, undefeated, 3-division world champion, former junior welterweight undisputed world champion, currently the WBO welterweight world champion, who is widely considered by many to be the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world, Terence Crawford. He doubled down on two-time junior middleweight world champion, who's the unified WBC, WBA, IBF, Ring Magazine, junior middleweight world champion, superstar boxer, Jermell Ironman Charlo. We know that yesterday, Terence Crawford, he responded and reacted to Jermell Charlo's undisputed showdown with undefeated WBO junior middleweight, reigning world champion, Argentine superstar boxer, Brian Castano. The fight ended in a draw, controversial draw. With that said, most people, majority of the boxing world, 72% of the boxing world that Showtime took a vote on thought that Brian Castano won the fight. One of the judges had it 114-114, a draw, and another judge had it 114-113 for Castano. But the one that got everybody's attention is another judge had it 117-111 for Jermell Charlo, meaning that Jermell Charlo won 9 rounds to 3, that he dominated the fight, and that clearly was not the case. So with that said, Terence Crawford, he weighed in and he stated that was a bit of home cooking. You clearly didn't win that fight. Brian Castano won the fight. Good night. I'm signing off. Now Terence Crawford comes back. He says, I'm back. Just took a break. I'm back. And he says, at Jermell Charlo, this is why you'll never be pound for pound. This is why you're not on the pound for pound list. Because you lost that fight. You got a lot of making up to do. End quote. So, we know this past week, there was talks and reports that Terence Crawford could make his way north to 154 from 147, which he currently campaigns at 147. He can make his way north to campaign at 154. And should Jermell Charlo have won the fight last night against Brian Castano, as most people expected, seeing as though Jermell Charlo has such a size advantage over Brian Castano, standing at 6 feet tall with a 74-inch arm reach, and Brian Castano at 5'7.5" with a 67-inch arm reach. He had a 4-inch height advantage over Brian Castano and a 7-inch arm reach advantage over Brian Castano, and he was seen to be the better technically skilled boxer, okay, and have more power, essentially. Brian Castano, he doesn't have many fights in his career. Brian Castano, he only has 12 knockouts in his career. Brian Castano is seen to be, not the most skilled boxer. He's a pressure fighter, okay? But he has these lapses on defense that most people, including myself, expected Jermell Charlo to take advantage of. Brian Castano, 17 wins, no losses, now 2 draws, 12 wins by way of knockout. He's 31 years of age. And the 2 draws, oddly enough, are the 2 biggest fights in his career, and I thought he won both the fights. That being the fight with Jermell Charlo, and that being the fight with Erislandy Lara. So with that said, those are the 2 biggest fights in his career, and I thought he won both of those fights, okay? Very close fights, but I thought that he did enough to get the victory in both of those fights, okay? Definitely not a judge scoring at 117-111 in favor of Jermell Charlo. That he missed a very, very good fight. So Terence Crawford, was talked about matchmaking Terence Crawford versus Jermell Charlo. Brian Castano, Jermell Charlo, 34 wins, 1 loss, 1 draw, 18 wins by way of knockout. That loss coming at the hands of Tony Harrison, which he later, rectified that. The draw coming last night against Brian Castano. He's 31 years of age, and he's the unified world champion, okay? Terence Crawford, 37 wins, no losses, no draws. 27 wins by way of knockout. He's 33 years of age at 5'8" with a 74-inch arm reach. So Terence Crawford is saying Jermell Charlo is not pound for pound and will never be pound for pound because he has a lot of work to do, okay? Now, one can make the case that Terence Crawford himself, has some ground to be made up, okay? Because Terence Crawford, hasn't been fighting the best of opposition. Terence Crawford, a lot of people feel like he's been fighting actually low-level opposition, and Terence Crawford shouldn't be in the top pound-for-pound of fighters currently right now as it stands himself, because he's a 3-division champion, he's undisputed junior welterweight, but he hasn't had that high-profile, high-lucrative fight. And Terence Crawford is even admitting of this himself. Terence Crawford, he stated that he hasn't had that fight yet, and he's seeking it out. He was seeking it out for the better part of 4 or 5 years, or 5 to 6 years, however you look at it, with 8-division legendary iconic Filipino superstar boxer Manny Pac-Man Pacquiao. Ironically enough, the biggest fight in the sport of boxing is Terence Crawford, 50%, and the other 50% is Jermell Charlo's very close friend and stablemate, undefeated, unified WBC, IBF welterweight world champion superstar boxer, who is widely considered by many to be top 3 best pound-for-pound fighters in the world, and that's Errol the True Spence Jr. Errol Spence Jr., 27 wins, no losses, no draws, 21 big wins by way of knockout. He's 31 years of age. He stands at 5'9.5" with a 72-inch arm reach. And oddly enough, Errol Spence is going to secure that fight that Terence Crawford has been looking to secure against Manny Pacquiao. Okay, so Terence Crawford, is very confident in himself and his abilities. And this is not the first time Terence Crawford went back and forth or had things to say regarding Jermell Charlo. When Jermell Charlo was asked about how a fight would play out between Errol Spence, who's a close friend and stablemate, and Terence Crawford, and he stated Errol Spence all day. Obviously, that's the route he would take because that's his close friend and his stablemate. Just like Terence Crawford team would take the route of Terence Crawford immediately. Well, that didn't go over well with Terence Crawford, and Terence Crawford said, "Don't make me gain some pounds and come up to 54 and knock you out." Okay, so this is not the first time. Now, this would be a huge fight. This would be the biggest fight in both guys' career. But like I stated, it was expected for Jermell Charlo to win the fight. And should he have won the fight and Terence Crawford decided to move up to junior middleweight, 154, he would be the automatic mandatory challenger immediately for Jermell Charlo should he have beaten Brian Castano, because he's the WBO belt holder at 147. And the WBO operates in the manner of, if you move up in weight and didn't lose the belt, not on the scale or in the ring, obviously, you automatically become the mandatory in the weight class that you are moving up to. Immediately you get moved to the front of the line. So if Terence Crawford is to move up right now, he would have to face Brian Castano. But if he moves up after what is expected to be the highly anticipated rematch now, and Jermell Charlo was to win, then he would immediately be Jermell Charlo's mandatory challenger. But now, obviously, seeing as though this fight ended in a draw, and seeing as though they're going to have to do a rematch, that means Jermell Charlo is going to have some mandatories. He already has a WBC mandatory challenger and a former foe who he knocked out, and that being Erickson the Hammer Lubin, who's grown leaps and bounds since that loss. Okay, he's the WBC mandatory challenger for Jermell Charlo now, and obviously there's going to be IBF mandatory challenges. There's going to be WBA mandatory challenges. So he's going to have some mandatory challenges. So if he was to beat Brian Castano, he would be Terence Crawford, that is, would be the mandatory, but he would have to wait because he has some other obligations that he would have to fulfill before fighting Terence Crawford, okay? Or he may have to vacate some of the belts. So with that said, everybody's going to clamor to see the rematch. Now, the size difference. I thought the size difference between Jermell Charlo and Brian Castano was going to be a major factor in this fight, and I proved to be incorrect, okay? Brian Castano, I underestimated Brian Castano. I undervalued Brian Castano's skill set and his approach to the sport of boxing, what he brings to the fight. And Brian Castano completely shocked me. Okay, I watched Brian Castano and Erislandy Lara, who's a southpaw pure boxer, who's a mover and a thinker and a counterpuncher. That's slick. And Brian Castano's style gave him a lot of trouble. But I wasn't surprised because there's other fighters, that pressure fighters, that give him trouble as well. Like Jerry Hurd, who beat Erislandy Lara and doesn't have the best defense in the world. Or you look at Alfredo Angulo. He dropped Erislandy Lara twice. and he's nowhere near the skill level or on the talent of an Erislandy Lara. So I thought Brian Castano style and just being slightly more technically skilled than Hurd and Fredo Angulo, that's why he had success against Erislandy Lara. But I was completely wrong. It's just the technical approach of Brian Castano. It's how he thinks his way onto the inside. He's not just a plodding forward pressure fighter. He is a very, very smart, very, very calculated pressure fighter. And with that said, I underestimated Brian Castano, and I believe that the rest of the boxing world underestimated Brian Castano as well. And he surprised a lot of people, including Jermell Charlo. Jermell Charlo seemed to be very, very confused in the fight. He seemed to be very lost in the fight. And he wasn't utilizing his jab as his corner. Derrick James, a future Hall of Famer, well-renowned trainer, 2-time trainer of the year, was giving him instructions to use his jab, and he just wasn't following it. I don't know if it was because of the counterpunchability of Brian Castano. I don't know if it was the pressure and the looks that Brian Castano was giving him, but he was very reluctant to let his hands go and let his jab go ultimately. A rangefinder. And when he did let his hands go and use the rangefinder and follow up with combinations, he had much success. He badly hurt Brian Castano in the second round, and he badly hurt him in the 10th round, okay? So I believe in the second fight, Jermell Charlo is definitely going to make adjustments, but I'm interested to see what adjustments Brian Castano made. So Terence Crawford's size, I thought Brian Castano's size was going to be an issue, but Terence Crawford is more rangier. He has a 74-inch arm reach just like Jermell Charlo. He's 5'8", so he's just a half an inch taller than Brian Castano, but he has the same arm reach as Jermell Charlo. Actually, slightly longer because Jermell Charlo's arm reach is 73.5, and Terence Crawford is at 74. And Terence Crawford has more power than Brian Castano. And he's a switch fighter. He can switch from orthodox to southpaw and give Jermell Charlo tons and tons of different looks that could possibly confuse Jermell Charlo. And he would look confused against Brian Castano. Imagine how he would look against Terence Crawford fighting orthodox and then suddenly he's southpaw. So that's a very interesting matchup, in my opinion, and I would love to see it. It would be the biggest fight in both guys' career. But first things first, the biggest fight in the sport of boxing is Errol Spence and Terence Crawford. That's what I want to see. But everybody had an issue with Jermell Charlo not being on the pound-for-pound list, including myself. I felt like Jermell Charlo should definitely have been on the pound-for-pound list. I don't think this fight deterred my thoughts or should deter anybody else's thoughts. It definitely hasn't deterred mine from him being on the pound-for-pound list. His past accomplishments and the fight with Brian Castano still was a very close fight, warrant him being on the pound-for-pound list, just not in Terence Crawford's eyes. But that's all I got for y'all. Make sure you hit the like button, drop a comment in the comment section, let me know what y'all think. Y'all already know what it is. It's your boy Blue, Blue Blood Sports TV. Hate, like, comment, and subscribe. If you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the bell icon, and get all the new notifications. Follow me on Instagram at Blue Blood Sports TV, all one word. Y'all already know what it is. Shout out to the entire LDBC. Shout out to New Media. Shout out to Black Media Row. Make sure you like and share these videos. That's all I got for y'all. Peace.
Hi, my name is Heather Vahid Hardy, and you're watching Blue Blood Sports TV.